So we know proteins are absolutely essential, right? They're the building blocks for just about everything in our bodies. But what happens when those very same molecules turn against us, when they trigger a response that's not just dramatic, but sometimes really dangerous? Today, we're going to dive into that, the complex world of adverse food reactions, to figure out exactly how and why this happens.
And this is really the core question we're going to unpack. How can two people eat the exact same food and have such wildly different outcomes? The answer, as you'll see, is all about what's happening inside our bodies, in our immune and metabolic systems.
All right, first up, let's talk about the one most people are familiar with, the classic food allergy. This is what happens when the body's internal security system, your immune system, makes a huge mistake.
And this isn't some rare thing. Food allergies affect up to 10% of people, especially in more westernized countries. That's basically 1 in 10 people who have to navigate a world where their next meal could be a potential threat.
So here's what's actually going on. Your immune system sees a totally harmless food protein, we call that an allergen, and mistakes it for a dangerous invader, like a virus or bacteria. In response, it creates these special antibodies called immunoglobulin E, or IgE. Think of these IgE antibodies as little flags that tag the protein for destruction, setting off a massive chain reaction that causes all those allergy symptoms.
Now, while almost any food can theoretically cause an allergy, it turns out that over 90% of all food allergies are caused by just these 9 major players. You've seen these called out on food labels, I'm sure. Everything from milk and eggs to shellfish, and the newest one added to the list, sesame.
And the reaction itself? It can be all over the map. It might be just some annoying hives or an upset stomach, but it can also become life-threatening with things like chest tightness or being unable to breathe. When a reaction gets that bad, we call it anaphylaxis, and that's a full-blown medical emergency that can lead to shock and needs immediate help.
Now, this brings us to something that causes a ton of confusion. You hear people say they're allergic to something when they're not. So let's clear this up and talk about the huge difference between a food allergy and a food intolerance.
This chart lays it out perfectly. On one side, you have an allergy. The mechanism? A full-on immune system attack. The culprit? It's always a protein. The severity? Potentially life-threatening. Now look at intolerance. The mechanism is not immune-related. The culprit is usually some other substance, not a protein. And the severity? It can make you feel awful, for sure, but it's not going to be life-threatening. This distinction is absolutely fundamental.
So you can think of a food intolerance as more of a digestive problem or a chemical sensitivity. Your body just struggles to process a specific ingredient, which leads to discomfort, but it's not declaring all-out war on it like in an allergy. And the things that cause intolerance are different too. We're not talking about proteins anymore. Instead, it might be something like lactose, which is the sugar in milk, or maybe MSG, that flavor enhancer, or even a group of tricky-to-digest carbs called FODMAPs. Speaking of which, let's tackle one of the most talked about and honestly misunderstood substances out there, gluten. Reactions to gluten are pretty complex, so let's try and solve this puzzle. First, there's celiac disease, and this is so important. Celiac is not a food allergy. It's not a simple intolerance either. It is an autoimmune disorder. This is where your immune system makes antibodies to fight gluten, but those same antibodies get confused and start attacking your own body, specifically the lining of your small intestine.
And that friendly fire on your intestines is what leads to all the serious long-term problems. We're not just talking about an upset stomach. When you can't absorb nutrients properly because your gut is damaged, it can lead to things like anemia, weak bones, and even a higher risk for some pretty serious diseases.
This table does a great job of showing the difference between celiac and what we call non-celiac gluten sensitivity. Celiac is clearly autoimmune, with real intestinal damage that doctors can see in a biopsy. Non-celiac gluten sensitivity, on the other hand, is more of an intolerance. People get symptoms like headaches or fatigue, but there's no autoimmune attack and no damage to the intestine. Diagnosing it is a process of elimination. You have to rule out celiac first.
Okay, let's shift gears completely. We've talked about immune reactions, autoimmune reactions, and intolerances, but there's another category we have to cover, and it's totally different: genetic metabolic disorders. Let's look at the story of PKU.
Phenylketonuria, or PKU, has absolutely nothing to do with the immune system. This is a genetic issue. People with PKU are born without a working enzyme that's needed to process one specific amino acid, phenylalanine. Without that enzyme, phenylalanine builds up in the body and becomes toxic, especially to the brain.
This diagram shows exactly what's going on. In a healthy person, there's an enzyme that turns phenylalanine into another amino acid, tyrosine. It's a simple conversion. But in PKU, that enzyme is broken. The whole metabolic pathway is blocked. So phenylalanine just piles up, kind of like a traffic jam. And that pileup is what causes all the damage.
Because this is so dangerous for a developing brain, every single newborn in the US gets tested for PKU right after birth. If they have it, the treatment is a super strict, lifelong diet that's extremely low in phenylalanine. That means avoiding most high-protein foods and using special medical formulas to get the nutrition they need. And you've definitely seen this out in the real world, even if you didn't know what it was. Ever seen that warning on a can of diet soda, the one that mentions phenylalanine? That's because the artificial sweetener aspartame contains it. That warning is there specifically to protect people with PKU.
So, we've walked through 4 very, very different ways the body can have a bad reaction to food. Let's pull it all together now and talk about why making these distinctions is so incredibly important.
Here's the bottom line, the big takeaway from all of this. The mechanism matters. You have to know why the reaction is happening. Is it an allergy, an intolerance, an autoimmune disease, or a metabolic disorder? Figuring that out is the absolute key to getting the right diagnosis and, more importantly, the right treatment. You just can't approach them all in the same way.
And this leads us to a huge practical question. Every single one of these conditions requires avoiding certain foods, sometimes entire food groups. So that raises a big challenge. How do you possibly build a healthy, nutritionally complete diet when so much is off limits? Well, that's exactly what we're going to start exploring next as we dive into the world of plant-based diets.